So welcome everyone. This panel today is a discussion on the state of youth mental health, and we have a host of folks who are going to be speaking from their personal experience working in youth and adolescent mental health. I'm just going to very quickly ask that each panelist introduce themselves. Let us know your name and your service setting that you work in, just to give us an idea of the places that are being represented, and then we'll get into the thick of the program. May begin with Dr. Cambry, please.
I'm April Cambry, and I primarily work on the adolescent inpatient unit at Bradley Hospital.
Dr. Basson.
Hello, my name is Dr. Daisy Basson. I'm an outpatient child psychiatrist working at Thrive Behavioral Health.
Thank you. Dr. Pingatori.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. My name is Dr. Fran Pingatori, and I work at Hasbro Children's Hospital, primarily in the pediatric medical psychiatric setting, and also have an active outpatient group psychotherapy practice with adolescents.
Thank you. Dr. DeMarderosian.
Hi, I'm Diane DeMarderosian. I am a pediatrician, and I work at Hasbro Children's Hospital in the Hasbro Partial Hospital Program, and I'm also the division director for the Pediatric Division of Integrated Health.
Dr. Freeman.
Hi, I'm Randy Freeman. I have a private practice in Barrington, and I mostly specialize in children with autism spectrum disorders and also do some family therapy, but I see a wide variety of children and adults.
Courtney Milburn.
Hi, I'm Courtney Milburn. I'm a school psychologist with the Coventry Public Schools, and currently I'm working in the middle school setting.
And lastly, Karis Transu.
Hi, I'm Karis. I am an outpatient therapist and clinical supervisor at Thrive Behavioral Health, and I specialize in dialectical behavior therapy.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to begin by just bringing up each individual topic, and I'm going to allow whoever feels appropriate to take over on that answer. But for the first question in particular, we would like input from all of the panelists. And that is, would you please define the youth mental health crisis as you see it from your practice or perspective, and what factors are contributing? Beginning back from the top with Dr. Cambry, please.
Sure. I think there are a number of things that are contributing to the mental health crisis. I think some of that is, children were not able to be in school for a period of time. And as the kids were starting to go back into school, I think they have struggled more than they were actually during the height of the pandemic. I think the transition back, they lost some academic instruction and, were expected to, kind of jump right back into school, which was tough for them. And I think also they missed out on some social development. And so coming back and interacting with kids, again, I think it's been difficult. And there were also a number of stressors that were put on families during this time. People out of work, the family systems were more stressed. And I think all of that led to, kids having more difficulty. And you add on top of that, it's been hard to access care during this time. There, for a long time, reimbursement for mental health providers has not kept pace with, inflation, and people have been leaving the field. People aren't going into the field as much. It's hard for families to access outpatient care, and then things build and lead to a crisis when maybe in the past, if they had been able to access care a little sooner, then things wouldn't have gotten to the point where they're ending up in the emergency room. So I think one thing that, we can do about that is to, I think for families is to be able to reach out to people at school and with their pediatricians. They're always able to help people access care. But I think we also need to do something at the legislative level so that we can increase reimbursement and increase the pool of people that we have in the state so that people can get to care better.
Thank you. Dr. Basson?
Oh, I want to say first that I agree with everything that Dr. Cambry just said. Not that she took my answer, but I will sort of build off of that answer. I think that the pandemic was a catalyst for the crisis, but I think that children's mental health has been underserved and in disarray for a number of years. I first came out of training and I trained in Rhode Island. Kids could get home-based therapy for up to a year at a time. And now usually home-based therapy is only covered in 12-week increments at most, which is not a long enough period of time for most families to stabilize. I think there's been a chronic underinvestment in lower levels of care. We're actually lucky in Rhode Island compared to a lot of states. We have a number of different levels of care in the state, starting with pediatricians and outpatient offices, but including more specialized care, day hospital programs, and Bradley Hospital, which is one of the only hospitals of its kind in the entire country. The division that Dr. D. Tormosian is leading is unique in the country. So we have a lot of resources here, but we haven't necessarily expanded them all as they needed to be. So I think the fact that we don't have enough outpatient clinicians doing sort of standard outpatient care, but also home-based care, leads to the fact that kids get sicker and end up in the emergency room. They clog up the emergency room. They're sicker. So when they get hospitalized, they have to stay in the hospital longer. So the whole system grinds to a halt. So the good news is we already have a lot of existing systems that just need to be nurtured and expanded in this state compared to a lot of states where they might have to build it from the ground up. But I think that we need to invest more in outpatient care, but also sort of equivalent with that, making sure that we have enough school psychologists and also other school level folks, social workers, paras, all that kind of stuff. So I think that people need to, in addition to getting involved at the legislative level, state, people need to show up at their school committee meetings and make sure that they're voting in school budgets and making sure that their schools are properly staffed and funded so that we're not seeing cuts to, after school programs, but also we're not seeing cuts to our precious child school psychologists and school social workers who make such a great difference. And we know that kids go to school every day. The majority of kids go to school every day. And so that's one of the places that any emerging illness would be picked up first. But if we have one school psychologist for an entire district or covering 2 different schools, there's no way that person can do that job. So we need to build on what we have. We have a good start, but we need to keep going with it. And we need to get everyone to feel like they can make a difference because we all can.
Thank you. Dr. Pingatori?
Thank you. Along with Dr. Cambry and Dr. Basson, I agree, the highlighting significant, important points that my guess is that all of us would make. And in terms of thinking about what I could add additionally, as both Dr. Cambry and Dr. Basson highlighted, is we already had a significant mental health crisis. And then COVID came along. And, for so many of us, when in the context, in the spirit of COVID and the uncertainty early on, for many of us, at least at the very beginning, we thought it might be a couple-week thing or event. And here we are, right, 26 months later. And in the context of this uncertainty and this time and all that's happened as a result, there has been a significant increase for those kids that were already struggling. I think what I would contribute, an additional piece I could add in to what Dr. Cambry and Dr. Basson already highlighted, was we're also seeing a lot of youth who had not presented before, right? So we knew, and a lot of us are treating those kids that were struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, suicidal ideation behaviors, we could go on. And in the context of the last couple of years, so many of the children and adolescents that were not already had pre-existing issues now do, right? So it's kind of like this perfect storm in the context of all that it has happened. I think I'll stop at that point because I want to be sensitive to the other expert panelists. So there might be some other pieces they can step into. So I'll stop at that point for right now.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman?
Can't hear you, Dr. Freeman.
Muted, Dr. Freeman.
Sorry about that. So I agree with what everyone said before. A couple of things on a national level, we have a severe shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. There's approximately about 8,000 child psychiatrists nationally, and there's a need, I think it's like 40,000. It's quite a huge delta. And there's a number of reasons for that. There's a lot of people in training saying, well, why should I go for all this training? We're being replaced by mid-level providers that can go out there and do that. And this is an extra year of training, in some cases, extra 2 years of training. And so I think that's a legislative change that needs to happen, because historically physicians will follow the money, whether that's in form of loan repayment or reimbursement, but that's the way that the trend typically goes. So as far as like my specific population, I'll speak to that a little bit. So in the autism community, not being in school means, so a lot of these kids get a lot of their services in school, special education services, and that has gone via Zoom. That's been mixed both ways. My wife, who's a special education teacher, said that she was able to provide, in some case, better special education one-on-one care via Zoom with no distractions, but they can't get that socialization element, which they desperately need. Another thing that fell out is many of these kids were waiting and waiting for mental health support, where, a worker that can take them out into community and teach them social skills, and the pandemic just killed that. And so we've got a lot of kids that their social skills are just going down and down and down. Their ability for distress tolerance and emotional regulation has gone way down, because they're not getting, the school actually provides quite a bit of like how to regulate yourself on a daily basis. And without that, it's hard for them. I could add a few more things, but I want to be respectful for everyone else's input as well.
Thank you. Dr. DeMartirosian?
Yeah, so I think obviously absolutely agree with everything that's been said. I really like Dr. Pignaturi's analogy of the perfect storm, which I think really captures things very well. In that, we already know that this age group we're talking about, children, adolescents, young adults, are already an age group at risk. In general, 50% of all lifetime mental health illness presents by 14, and then 75% by 24. So that's kind of where we're starting. And then when we, a lot of those kids are picked up in places like have been mentioned, schools, community settings. And so that's a real opportunity historically, but of course during the pandemic, those interactions were just halted. And so even just kids who'd been presenting naturally because of their genetics and because of the course that they would have taken without the pandemic, they weren't in the places where they might kind of be identified early. I think that also is true for interactions with pediatricians and medical providers, because we all know during the pandemic, we know that people present with emotional distress in lots of different ways. And kind of in my area of expertise, we see a lot of kids presenting with physical symptoms that are either compounded by or representative of significant emotional distress. They're not they're not kind of more classically presented as externalizers or kind of internalizers, but they're externalizing things in a different way by presenting with real medical symptoms, and with a lack of kind of in-person access to pediatric folks over the course of the pandemic, as we all avoided doctors' offices and tried to avoid having in-face sessions with people. I think that those things also, and those opportunities to kind of pick up on the distress that was manifesting in different ways for kids and families, are kind of missed. So I think just to kind of echo what everybody's saying, this idea that kind of some of the typical places where we have identified kind of earlier on these kids that may have presented anyway, and now of course we compound it with the stressors of COVID and the population of the growing population of kids and families that are presenting with distress. It just has kind of been the tipping point.
Thank you for that. Courtney Milburn?
Hi, yeah. So, to kind of echo and tag on to what Dr. Cambry was saying to start us all off, we're seeing so much more in the schools, right? As Dr. Basson had mentioned, kids are in school all day. And so on the front lines here as the school psychologist, we're charged with almost having mental health clinics here in school. We're seeing kids presenting with more self-injurious behaviors, suicidal ideation language, whether or not they're intentional about what they're saying, which leads to myself and the two social workers that I'm here working with. We're spending lots of time assessing risk. And this has, I think, heightened since the pandemic, seeing much more of it here at the middle school level. As Dr. Cambry was mentioning, these kids were so isolated for so long, and now they're coming back into schools. They're having a hard time socializing. The school avoidance piece has been another really big problem that we're having, getting kids to come back into school. And even the kids who are here at school, attending classes. One of our big issues in this building right now is kids walking out of classes, not showing up to their classes. And then, the education around mental health and the stigma that the staff needs, as educators, their work is to provide teaching and learning to the students. And kids are struggling with mental health needs right now. So it's all trying to find that balance. The other piece from my role is when I have a child in front of me that requires more services from, say, all of you outside of the school setting, the wait lists, as you mentioned, the shortages in staffing in places. If we have a child who we feel like needs to be seen at the hospital, the wait times at the hospital are, hours, days, weeks sometimes for them to get beds and be seen. So really, I see a need for not only more support here on the front lines in the schools, but also more collaboration amongst school and outside providers, and how we can wrap around these families to get them the help that they need. And I can go on, and I know it kind of overlaps with a lot of the questions that we're going to be answering in the future. So, but in the schools, it definitely, we're turning into, mental health clinics. And, the more support we can have here in the schools, the better.
Thank you. And then Carrie Stranzu?
Yes, I'm so glad I'm going after Courtney, because we just had our team meeting and some of our clinical staff are now stationed at some of the schools in Warwick and Coventry, doing daily risk assessments, sending kids to the ER, really managing complex things that are just, they're being identified at such a higher rate now that we're in there. And so then the kids are referred to us, and as an outpatient clinician, I'm managing cases that really require a higher level of care, but because of the wait lists, we can't get them in. And I'm not reimbursed at the same rate as an outpatient therapist in private practice. So it's really challenging to hold on to staff, to balance the multiple needs of the child and the family. Our kids in the pandemic have revealed to us, coming back now, how much their own parents struggle with mental health and how much the environment at home was stressed. And so our staff are trying to go into the homes to help stabilize, to reduce the need for higher level of care. And you add on the restrictions with that. Just today, we've needed to switch back a lot of our treatment to virtual because of COVID exposures. So it's a constant back and forth of trying to meet needs and really provide the right level of care. But it's so hard with the staffing and with the wait lists. And I think too, just in terms of kids getting to school, staying in class, I can tell you with my entire caseload, that's a challenge. The ability to tolerate discomfort is so much less because of COVID. Getting on the bus, sitting in a classroom, most of my kids can't tolerate a full school day. And so it's on, again, the teachers that didn't come into the field to specialize in mental health are now being asked to do that. And so at least from Thrive, we're trying to create more of a collaboration so that our staff are doing the mental health piece and really coordinating with the teachers, paraprofessionals, school psychologists, social workers. But it's a lot that we're all being tasked to do right now. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to move on so that we can kind of have a little bit of a balance to all of the doom and gloom feel of this is what we're working with. This is the setting that everyone is trying to practice in right now. But could we maybe have each panelist spend about a minute or so speaking about opportunities and innovations for how we can help to make the system better? And then again, from the top of my list, I have Dr. Cambry, please.
Sure. So I feel like one of the main ways to make things better is to have a bigger pool of outpatient providers. And I think that really starts at the legislative level, and increasing reimbursement for people that are practicing. There are people that go to surrounding states to practice rather than staying in Rhode Island, just because of our reimbursement. So I think, if families, the people that are really needing the help, if you're reaching out to our public officials and letting them know, this is what we need. And these are the kinds of laws and legislation that could be helpful. I think that will help increase our pool. I think Dr. Basson made some great points. Like, we have a lot of things already in our small state. We just really need more people to man them. And that, the front lines are really, our pediatricians and schools. I think that's where kids present first. After they've seen someone at school or seen their pediatrician, that's when, us as psychiatrists, that's, when we come in. So that's later. So, and there's a program that pediatricians are actually able to call, PDPRN. So that, pediatricians, if they don't feel comfortable managing certain things, and they can't access a psychiatrist, they're able to call that hotline and get some guidance. So those are some of the innovative things that we've done to try to help, bridge this gap in need and what's available.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Basson?
Thanks. So I, again, agree with everything Dr. Cambry said. I think that'll be the case. I agree with everybody, what everyone says. So, speaking to some of those points, a group of pediatricians and child psychiatrists have joined together in the state to try to take the bull by the horns here and work on things. And so we have now a work group that worked on creating a Rhode Island specific declaration of a state of emergency. And I've been trying to do a lot more press. And we've been on TV and done stuff on the radio and the newspaper so that everyone has a chance to learn about the situation and everyone has a chance to sort of start thinking together collaboratively. Honestly, we probably feel like we should have had this collaboration a while back because it's Rhode Island and didn't we all know each other already, but we're finding that it's been very helpful to be able to work together, to be able to pivot and to work to create testimony for the State House as professionals. But I think everyone should know that you don't have to be a medical professional to submit testimony at the State House, and you don't have to show up at the State House to submit testimony. You can always submit written testimony, and you can always send emails to your elected officials. We have put together as part of the work group some ideas we have that might end up being helpful. So we already have PDPRN in Rhode Island, which is that system where the pediatricians can call and speak with a child psychiatrist. And so we are putting out there the idea that maybe we'd create a school equivalent where school psychologists and social workers could be able to reach out to a child psychiatrist or a clinical staffing agency that, so we could do that same kind of hotline to work on access and also equity. And the last thing I'll sort of put in here as a little plug is that one of the few things that I think we've sort of gotten out of the pandemic is telehealth and using telehealth wisely. So for a lot of people, it can be hard to get to the doctor's office, but they can get on a phone session or on a screen. And maybe if they have a mixture of that, a hybrid model, it allows them to attend more appointments more frequently. We don't have to worry about weather interfering as much. And we're all familiar with, the snow in January, but also like the hurricane season. So that would make it easier for us to keep appointments more and to be able to meet people where they're at. And there are also bills in the State House about expanding broadband, which is an equity issue so that everyone has access, because that's now become sort of just like you need to have access to clean water and to electricity and to broadband so that you can use your phone so you can participate in telehealth. And there are also bills at the both state and federal level that are going for that. There's actually a lot of money coming into the state so we can expand broadband so that everyone in Rhode Island can access telehealth. Not that they can only have telehealth, but that becomes part of it, because I think that is one of the few things that has become sort of positive, that we have that aspect now. And in the world of psychiatry, I think we were already using telehealth in different parts of the country, but we're able to use it more because we do a little bit less hands-on and a lot more talking to people. So it fits us well in a lot of cases. So I'll just sort of put out that telehealth piece, because I think there's probably ways we can be even more clever about using it going forward so that we can collaborate more effectively and that people can reach out and get their needs met sooner, because I think we all understand if you can, fix a problem when it's small, it's easy to address. It's easy to blow out a candle. It's hard to put out a volcano.
That's a very good analogy. Dr. Pingatori?
Thank you. And again, I'm in complete agreement with what everyone has shared. And as we're kind of thinking about this question, Beth, that you just offered to us to give some feedback around, and listening to both Dr. Cambry and Dr. Batson, of course, are in complete agreement. I guess I think I'll just kind of step back around, sort of give it a little frame around the question in terms of thinking about a lot of the details we're starting to talk about, and I'll give some input about that as well. What I would offer is this, and I've had, been talking with, obviously, daily with Dr. Martirosyan around this, is, we already had a significant issue, right? We already had a crisis. And if there's a silver lining in any of this in the last couple of years, is that the youth mental health illnesses, challenges, issues that are coming up have been so magnified that in general, we're just talking about it more universally. And as we talk about it more universally and we become more comfortable, the greater, we, then maybe there's less stigma, right? So we know that that's another issue. So as we gain this, it's so out there. And as we gain comfort, I mean, we have comfort and others do, but not everyone. It's been such a crisis in the last couple of years that we have been compelled to talk about it. And more people are becoming more comfortable with it. So if there's a silver lining, I would offer that. I'll be curious if other colleagues, as you're answering the question, your thoughts about that frame. In addressing the mental health challenges of our youth and family, it's just more part of the conversation and universally. So I would just say that in general. In terms of stepping into the specifics, again, along with Dr. Cambry and Dr. Basson on multiple levels, on the state level, and, thinking about Courtney and Karis's reflection in all our statement. And as you both were talking, I was like, gosh, we just need to give resources around helping our colleagues to help kids how to relearn how to socially connect, because they've lost that, right? In the context of this profound isolation and all this has come up. So there's a lot of the details of how we can do this. Again, Dr. Cambry and Dr. Basson talked about it. I'm going to leave some space for others to step into it. So I think for this question, what I want to offer is sort of a frame of and a silver lining. So I'll stop there for right now.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman?
We can't hear you, Dr. Freeman.
I wanted to mention one of the benefits of telehealth, specifically for my population. As you notice, we can't make eye contact right now. It's impossible because in order to make eye contact, you have to look at your camera. We both have to look at our camera at the same time. So maybe it looks like we're making eye contact, but that's a big deal for people with autism and people with social anxiety. When the pandemic first started, I was amazed. Patients that weren't talking to me in the office just started opening up like crazy. And so I think there's a real place for that. And there was a lot of concern initially about, oh, well, that's going to enable, they're not going to want to come back to the office, blah, 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 blah. And I just haven't seen that. I've seen it as a medium to meet kids exactly where they're at with their communication abilities, and get them talking. And then when I bring them into the office, they're just at another level, and we get over that hurdle just as we have. I have not seen it to be like, well, I just want to do telehealth, I'm not coming in. And it's also prevented so many canceled appointments. And I just tell all my patients, like, yeah, you can call me 5 minutes late and say you have to convert to telehealth. That's fine. Like, I'd rather do that than miss the appointment. The other piece, I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot what else I was going to add. It was something that Dr. Pingatori had mentioned that I wanted to build off of.
Dr. Freeman, was it around sort of that context of sort of the silver lining, and that we are, we're just more comfortably universally talking about mental health?
Yes, thank you. So in outside of clinical context, I'm with youth in different other settings, and I've just noticed they just talk about mental health like it's like they're talking about going to the movies. So people are just openly talking about their depression or anxiety, or so and so has OCD, and they're not meaning it in the stereotypical, like, they're accurate with it. And I think that's great, is like, as you said, if we can talk about it, then we get rid of the stigma, and it's acceptable. And that's a beautiful thing. I think some of the families have been able to embrace the COVID restrictions and come together and be close. And on the other extremes, that's created conflict in and of itself. So there's so many, I think, positives to think about that we can continue to reframe for ourselves and for our patients.
Thank you. Dr. DeMartirosian?
Yeah, so I think, in reflecting on all of this, I think about what I've learned as a pediatrician, having the privilege to work and learn from psychology and psychiatry colleagues every day. I feel like I have a very unique and special job in that way. And I really do see the parallel of kind of this crisis in the work that we all are doing. And, especially for those of us that work in more intensive settings, we often, talk to families about the importance of, if we know a crisis is brewing, almost even creating a crisis, to be able to kind of get underneath it and get to the other side. And I'm hopeful, not that we ever wanted to create this crisis, and we know it was bubbling far before COVID. And so I think this idea of really not tiptoeing around things and really thinking deeply and digging deep to support systems and people and programs and resources to shift it. Maybe this is really what needed to happen. Just like sometimes that's what needs to happen to shift family systems and to shift behaviors and to shift the way that we all can function. So, I think about, that broad context of family, and realizing that this isn't just about the kids in front of us, but as it was so nicely referenced, it's about the context that we all live in, and it's our communities, and the tragedy that we, especially today, that we are seeing happening in our world and the impact that that has on all of us. And how do we, empower parents to have conversations with kids that are hard. It's about, thinking about systems functioning differently, and not necessarily we have great systems, but and how do we edify them and empower them to really meet kids where they are, and to have those people who are sitting with our kids and our parents and our families, picking up on things sooner than later, and then having the appropriate resources to, refer to. So I hope that we've shaken things up enough that we can really start to work in all these areas to think out of the box and really, revolutionize some systems that have not served us as providers or our patients or families as well as they could, and really also build on some really, really positive systems that exist in Rhode Island in particular as one of the, the flagship states for providing psychiatric resources in the country. Not most places don't have what we have, and we are really struggling here as well.
Thank you. Courtney Milburn?
So as far as some of the good that's come out of it, we've talked about the virtual settings and opportunities, right? With telehealth, or even in schools with Google Meets and things like that. And I remember back when the pandemic initially happened, there would be many hours of the day that I'd be sitting at my kitchen table waiting for my students to log on. I'd send them the link. And then I had the others that would be there with me every day or every time that we were scheduled to meet. And for them, it was a comfortable way for them to connect. And those virtual opportunities gave kids a way to socialize and be connected with one another during the pandemic. Now as we're transitioning out of all of that, the technology piece has also been a hindrance in a lot of ways to kids' mental health. And, that's down the list of questions there around technology use. But I have found with some of my families around telehealth and teletherapy, especially starting off with a new provider when we're trying to get them hooked up, that it actually isn't something that they're interested in doing. They want to have their child meet with somebody and have a connection with a person to start off with. I think for maybe some people who are already connected, some kids who are already connected with providers, that transitioning over to telehealth may have been easier because they already have the connection. But those connections are so, so important. As far as, again, talking about the good things that came out of it, like others have said, it really has brought to light what is happening with our youth. And it's enabled or forced even the school departments to really focus on what needs do we have, and where can we add staffing. It's so needed. Hasn't happened maybe so much yet, but I know that for our district, even things are in the works to get more support and more staffing as far as psychologists, social workers, and also collaboration. We really have had a nice collaboration this year with Thrive Behavioral Health that's been able to give an opportunity for us to get kids connected. So, I make my usual referrals to outside providers for families, and some families are really good about following up on that and getting their kids the supports and making those appointments and attending those appointments. But we have a lot of families who, if we didn't help them through the process, it wouldn't happen. So I know that this year we have had a couple Thrive clinicians housed here within our building a couple days per week, and they're completely separate from the school. It doesn't mean that we need less school staffing. We're completely separate, but having the ability to make a referral to Thrive, we can say to the families, would you like me to make that referral? And Thrive has been reaching out to our families and getting them, making intake appointments and getting them connected. And then the kids have the opportunity to be seen right here within the school setting. So it takes away that piece of parents saying, well, I don't have time to drive my child to an appointment, or no, I haven't made that phone call yet for the referral. So I feel like when we all are working together, whether I'm giving the example that we had this year, but I'm sure there are many more opportunities for us to be able to have connections so the school-based clinicians can have a nice seamless way to get families connected to outside providers, because I've been running into a lot of families calling back to say, those referrals you gave me, the wait lists are months long. And, we don't want people to have to wait, the need is right now. So, I feel that that's been a positive coming out of this as well.
Great, thank you. And Kara Stransu?
Yes, so completely agree. I have loved that we've been able to see kids during the school day and through telehealth. We have been able to access so many more kids than before. And as Dr. Freeman said, like the ratio of kept appointments way higher, my whole caseload keeps. It's just easier. You cut out the transportation time to the office, and kids are in their own comfort zone. And as a therapist, I love having that lens of like seeing into their bedroom and kind of just, it's a window of more information. I can identify more needs. I can engage more family members. I get to meet the pet. It's a whole different experience that I think has been really, really rich. And I haven't found it to be a barrier in clinical treatment. I tend to have, my kids are more older, later teenage, early 20s. But even some of my young ones, we'll play games on Zoom. We'll just different interactive things using the chat feature, using the whiteboard feature. I think as therapists, we've been able to bring a lot of creativity to this. And another thing that like to kind of manage a lot of the isolation that our kids were feeling is at Thrive, we've expanded on our group therapy program. So we've pulled a ton of kids that have identified needs and made groups. Whatever a clinician is interested in, whatever their kids are talking about, we're making a group for it. Gardening, sports, art therapy, drama therapy. And so we're able to access more kids and get people together. So we're kind of addressing the social needs that the pandemic really brought about. So there have definitely been positives that have come from this.
That's great to hear. So in the interest of time, we're down to about 15 minutes or so remaining in our hour. So I'm going to throw out a couple questions, and whoever feels that, you've got a grand answer, feel free to take the helm. One of the questions that we had from our members prior was about what some of the pressures are that are facing youth of this generation that maybe weren't an issue in previous generations, and how that might be contributing to the rise in need. Anyone want to field that?
Social media, 100% social media. Just in terms of so much exposure to information, maybe a lot of incorrect information, comparison to other kids. I mean, that's what I'm hearing a lot from my clients.
And Kara,
yes.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I was going to jump in and say the same thing. And the exposure is even younger, right? So there's all this exposure, and while there is some good stuff, right? We all know that, and we know there's a whole lot that isn't. It's even how the accessibility at such a younger age, and not that even at 16 or 17, some or maybe even more is okay. But, I'm seeing patients, 7, 8 years old, and I'm like, oh my goodness, right? So I want to highlight your answer. And, Dr. DiMatteo and I, we work very closely together. We talked about this exact factor, and even how young the access is. And often without permission, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And even the social media piece with, different groups that they can find, these groups that highlight, self-injurious behaviors and how to do it and how many cuts do you have, and, that glorify it, and these TikTok challenges that these kids are getting involved in, and, the Snapchats and the cyberbullying, we see it on a daily basis. And though technology and all the social media has such a good place for so many reasons, for our youth, especially those who are at risk for mental health issues, it's awful.
Yeah. Courtney, I'm very passionate, as we all are, about this. I want to make another comment and then I'll stop, so I have some space for others. One of the things that you just shared and reflected aloud with the group was something I wanted to step into, and you highlighted about the social media and in the settings, and what we know, and some of us on the panel are older than others are younger. And, in the old days, there may be some things that were going on in the school setting, and then you left school and kind of like left it, right? So it didn't like kind of follow you home and into your home environment and throughout like 24, and now everything's 24/7. And I'm not suggesting or endorsing in any way that some of those behaviors that were unkind and disruptive were okay then. However, they had more of a place, and now it's just kind of this continuum of the exposure. And so while we know there's good, there's a lot, the intent isn't as good. So I just wanted to highlight, since you mentioned that piece and you are in the school setting, I thought about that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to
And
comment.
often, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, often I think when the kids come into the hospital, we find that a lot of them feel a sense of relief. Like you would think they would be like almost in withdrawal from having their phones, but a lot of them find it's nice to not have to worry about that. So, and some of them make, I think it helps them think about how they, maybe this is impacting me more than I realized, when they have to take an extended break from it whenever they're here. The other thing I wanted to say, I mean, a couple of people kind of referenced, like, there can be some good. I think for some kids, social media can actually be life-saving for them. Like if there's no one if they are LGBTQ and there's no one at their home or at their school that they can really find a peer group, sometimes they can find people online that are supportive, and people can have really positive relationships at the same time. So I didn't want people in the audience to think that social media is 100% bad and no kid should have it until they're like 16. But so I think it can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just keeping a close eye and monitoring what kids are doing, would be, I think, important.
A couple of things. I think it's important that we all, regardless of what our views are on social media, that we all learn about it so that we're able to pass that information. We might be the only ones that's able to explain how to set boundaries or how to set parental controls to the parents. And then for, some people will make an argument of, hey, this is the future. The kids need exposed to it. But I would submit a child under 10 needs no exposure, because look at Facebook. It's already like dying. We're the only people, we're the old people that are still on Facebook. Nobody else is on it. So like it's going to have a life cycle that's going to be short-lived. So your 10-year-old is fine without being on social media. They'll have plenty of time to figure it out. And, I think we need to figure out how to create good boundaries and go on, like, ask ourselves, why am I going on social media? So it can go on there with intention versus go on there mindlessly. So just another mindfulness plug. I love mindfulness.
I think part of it also is, you're a new parent, you go to the pediatrician and they give you advice about different things, and car seats and bike helmets. And I think for all of us, we're sort of learning as we go about how to give advice about computer use, electronics, social media. Like, once upon a time when I was in training, you spent a lot of time talking about, good sleep. That meant taking the television out of the kids' room. They were being trained about take
Right.
the TV out of the room. Who has a TV in the room? Who cares about a TV? It's all about a phone, right? It's all like this small, and like we call it a phone, but it's not really a phone. We all remember probably what a phone was like. You're like, you need like a quarter and you made like, this is like a handheld computer. It's like the entire world on this small device. And they're, they're younger than us, they have more energy and they're wily. So we have to try to figure out like, how do we, because stuff is developing. And like, now it's, like Dr. Freeman's saying, like Facebook is, no one young is on Facebook, or if they're there, they're just sort of doing it to like be nice to their family, so you connect with your grandma on Facebook. So there's always these new iterations of like, what are we doing and what are we using? So I do spend some time trying to talk to families, especially with younger kids, about like, what are good resources you can find online? Are there websites that might be treatment focused, but just other things like I don't work for PBS, but like I'm the number one person, talk about like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood on PBS Kids, and basically all PBS Kids, because it has a lot of games and activities, but it's PBS Kids. So you can feel like, okay, you want your child to have some exposure, or they can do something. That's probably what you would have had on a screen. But for example, Daniel Tiger spends a lot of time talking about social emotional development. And there are books and there are toys, so that the screen part can be part of a larger tie-in. It's not just this thing on a screen. It's something that you can bring out into the rest of your life. And I also try to talk to kids and families about watching things online together. Because I think if you have watched a show together, whether it's good or bad, you have something to talk about. And sometimes kids don't want to talk to their parents, but they might talk about what's going on in their personal lives, but they might talk about why that show wasn't very good, or who should have gotten kicked off of the latest reality cooking show. And so it can be a kind of a way in. I will say I've recently been watching the chocolate guy, who's the chef who makes amazing contraptions out of chocolate. And so I've talked about like, watch the chocolate guy and see what you think. But this is something that's creative, it's positive, and it gives people a way of seeing like, I could do that, but also it's a conversation piece. And sometimes the conversation breaks down when people aren't feeling well, to have something to talk about, that you have a shared experience. Sometimes it's easier to just you're watching a 3-minute episode or something. So that, I think there are some positives to it, but part of it is trying to give kids and families guidance about how to navigate the waters, and not, come across stuff that they don't want to see. And I say this as a psychiatrist, but also as a parent, where, my kids sometimes be like, I didn't want to see this ad popped up, or I clicked on something, that's not what I thought it was. And then now I saw this thing and I didn't want to see it. So how do you help kids with that? Because sometimes it's just, accidentally, that wasn't happening in life before. You weren't just sort of like walking down the street and then bam, here's this thing. So having to figure out, like, because we do live in this world that's partly in the real world and partly this online world, like how do we navigate that? So I just want to put that out there. And I guess, again, my perpetual plug for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood.
I want to piggyback on one thing you said on parental controls. Like, parents themselves are the best parental control. Gaming with your kid, you can just open up a plethora of relationship opportunities if you'll sit down and play that game that you have zero interest in online, and let the child teach you how to play whatever, and you'll join them in their world.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. So we're coming up to the end of our hour, and I'm just going to ask that each panelist sum up, maybe in about 1 sentence, 2 sentences, the most important takeaway message that you think our audience should know on this topic. So to the top of my list, I have Dr. Cambry, please.
So I guess I think a lot of us have talked about access to care. So I think my big takeaway would be, please, reach out. I think access to care is not going to improve until we have more people, and that's going to require change at the legislative level. So I saw you posted some great things in the chat about how seems like there's some resources with NAMI about how to advocate and reach out to your legislature. It does sound pretty daunting, but it's really not that hard, and very easy for, everyone to do. All right. I think that's my main suggestion.
Thank you. And yes, anyone who is interested in learning more about that can contact us. Dr. Basson, please.
I guess what I would say is I think for a lot of us, it feels like the world is a very dark place and a very overwhelming place. And that every day we might be faced with some new catastrophe, whether it's happening in our personal lives or something that we're exposed to in the wider world. And it can feel really hard to know what to do. And I feel that way myself. So I really just try to think about not so much big things, but little things. I think for all of us, there's little things that we can do that make our home life and our school life and our communities better places. And they don't have to be a big thing. One little thing can make a difference. And when it comes to parents and kids, that could be, one cookie that you share or one bedtime story that you read together. It doesn't have to be this humongous big thing. And, conversations start with just saying hello. So I know a lot of parents feel like they have a hard time talking about certain topics with kids, but I think kids recognize that. So if you can just get it started a little bit, then they'll give you something back. But I want to give people a sense of it only takes one candle to light up the darkness.
Thank you. Dr. Pingatore?
The silver lining, I'm going to stay with my sort of frame of that's how I stepped into our group topic today, is that we have a need to connect in the world, and we have a need to feel connected. And in the context of this mental health crisis of our youth and beyond, we're being brought more closely together. And that's what makes up community. And by being in this together, in it, struggling as with the kids, as clinicians in the school settings, educators, pediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists, all of us, when we're doing it together and we're experiencing that pain together, we share that and it connects us and it's a little less of a burden. And it's really a process and it can be softened. And as I have often said, and I know Dr. Rosian says this all the time too, it really does take a village. And we and all of those that are listening to us together today and everyone beyond who will have an opportunity to hear this, we are that village. So we continue to connect and be connected. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman?
So I want to give I'll sum it up with quality over quantity. Make the child feel as if, because they are the most important person in the room. And 10 minutes of that is worth more than no matter how much time you spend with them. But also let them know when that time is. So if you're a busy parent, and you can let them know when their 10 minutes of fame, so to speak, is, if that's what you have to do. You can get so much more done in that amount of time when you're just fully present. So be fully present. Don't just be there.
Thank you. Dr. Rosian?
You're on mute, Dr. D.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I often talk about the 4 C's, and I think it's really is true for our patients, our families, for ourselves as providers, really striving to help ourselves feel comfortable and competent in what we're doing. And that requires, helping educate people and helping people trying to get the tools that they need to do this work. And then, this idea of connection, as has been mentioned, just so important. And the idea of collaboration. So, us being connected and working together, helping people feel competent and comfortable is really going to move this process forward in every environment.
Thank you. Courtney Milburn?
Yeah, kind of keeping with the theme, my thought to finish up was about balance and connection. Balance in whatever setting that you're in, whether as a parent, balancing your time with your busy, hectic work schedule and all the activities that the kids have going on, with time spent with the kids and how important connection is. Whether we're educators, doctors, parents, making connections with kids, developing and building those relationships. It goes so far, and we notice here in the school setting, the kids who feel like they have a connection with at least one person, are better for it.
Great, thank you. And Karis Transu?
I just wanted to say, Randy, what you said was so validating as a parent, that the quality does outweigh the quantity. So that makes me feel good as a parent. And secondly, with kind of everything we're talking about, I was thinking about how important it is to use our informal supports. So friends, neighbors, coaches, teachers, the church, whoever is in your village that may not be a licensed therapist, a doctor, we can start small there. And sometimes that's enough, is just that providing that connection. And so and I think Tammy had mentioned it in the comments, she said wraparound. And so that's kind of my system of kind of when I look at a family is who can we tag on to support addressing whatever the issue is. So thank you. I've loved this personally.
Thank you. Actually, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our participants and to those who are going to be watching the recording at another time. We very much appreciate you all bringing your expertise and offering of your time today. I know that this is going to be really important as a resource moving forward for all of our NAMI Rhode Island members and contacts. So thank you all. And to those going on to other sessions this afternoon, please hop into your new sessions, and to all the panelists, I will share the recording with you so that you may share it with your networks as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Take
Stay
care.
well.
Tammy.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.